All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating today, huh? We're talking snobbery,
Snobbery.
the psychology of it.
Yeah.
And we've got this excerpt from the Psychology of Snobbishness. And, this deep dive is really going to help us all kind of understand what makes someone a snob. Like, what are the tells, why they might be acting that way, and how can we maybe tell the difference between, someone who's really intelligent versus someone who's just trying to,
Show off.
show off. Exactly. Yeah. So this excerpt starts off by giving us a really clear definition, kind of lays out the groundwork for what snobbery actually is. And it boils down to three key things. And the first one is that snobs place a huge amount of importance on kind of superficial things.
Yeah. External factors.
Yeah, external factors like wealth or status or even specific knowledge.
Or even like fashion or taste in music.
Yeah, totally.
All that kind of stuff.
It's like they build up this whole hierarchy of value around these external factors. And
They put themselves at the top of it.
Of course, right. They believe they possess these prized traits to a much higher degree than anyone else, which then leads to that sense of
Superiority, entitlement, looking down at the mere mortals, as you said.
Exactly.
Right.
And that leads us right into that third element, right? It's like
dismissing, putting down those who don't.
Yeah, who don't meet their standards, which are often arbitrary,
Right. It can be very subtle, like someone kind of belittling your taste in music,
Oh, I've definitely experienced that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Name dropping to try and impress.
Ugh, yeah. Or it can be way more overt and have serious social consequences.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just like hurt feelings,
Yeah.
The excerpt brings up some pretty serious impacts of this behavior.
Yeah, like if you think about it, constantly being judged, it can trigger some pretty intense feelings, like inadequacy.
Shame, even resentment, anger.
You can really just chip away at your self-esteem and make you question your own worth.
Yeah, totally. And on a social level, it creates these barriers, right?
Invisible barriers, yeah.
Yeah, and people feel excluded, isolated, maybe unwelcome in certain circles because they don't fit that narrow definition of what's valuable.
It's like they're guarding this exclusive club.
And you're not on the list.
Not on the list, exactly.
So then it leads to that question, right? Like, why? Why do people do this?
Right. Like, what makes someone a snob? And it's interesting because the excerpt dives into this, and it's not so simple. It's not like they're all just bad people.
Right. One factor that it points to is upbringing, If someone grows up in an environment where these attitudes are just modeled or even implicitly encouraged, it can become this learned behavior.
It's like inheriting this set of values and ways of judging the world without even realizing it.
And you might not realize you're doing it until much later,
That's so true. But, upbringing isn't the whole story, right? The excerpt also points out that sometimes snobbery can be a way of covering up insecurities.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating, that whole psychological dynamic of overcompensating by creating this facade.
Right, like, classic name dropping.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they're struggling in their career and they feel this need to remind everyone, oh, yeah, I know this person.
I went to this school.
Exactly. So it's not always about being malicious. It's about
protecting a fragile ego.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have to talk about privilege.
Oh, of course.
Right. The excerpt suggests that for some people, especially those who've always had privilege,
it becomes entitlement.
Yeah, this twisted sense of entitlement, like they deserve special treatment just because of their background, their wealth,
It fuels that snobbish behavior.
Yeah.
Reinforces the hierarchy.
It all kind of ties together, and this is where I think the concept of social capital comes into play.
Social capital, that's an interesting one.
Can you explain that for our listeners? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so social capital, it's basically like, your networks, relationships, group affiliations that can give you advantages, opportunities.
So not just about having money or a fancy title, it's about
how you use it.
Yeah, wielding it in a way like almost to create distance, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I'm part of this club and you're not, that kind of thing.
And that brings us to this point that really resonated with me. It's this myth of high society equaling intelligence.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's so ingrained, But this excerpt, it really unpacks that, Just because someone has access to an elite education or specialized knowledge.
Like they went to a certain school or they know all the right people.
Yeah, it doesn't automatically make them smarter, exactly.
Like just because someone went to, I don't know, pick a fancy school.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they can think critically, solve a problem, or even have a conversation.
And often it's the opposite. I've met plenty of people from incredibly privileged backgrounds who lack
common sense, empathy.
Basic empathy, yeah. So it's about recognizing that intelligence is multifaceted.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all.
Okay, so I think we've laid some really good groundwork here, so let's explore this idea of intelligence a little further when we come back for part 2.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Mm.
Before we jump into all the different, facets of intelligence, I kind of want to go back to something you said earlier about snobs lacking that common sense or empathy.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the excerpt, it kind of touches on this connection between manners, behavior, and intelligence.
It's almost counterintuitive,
It's
right?
painful.
Like you would think someone who considers himself intelligent would understand the importance of basic social graces and treating others with respect,
And yet it suggests that true intelligence goes hand in hand with humility and respect.
And empathy, right?
Yeah, empathy, recognizing that everyone has worth, no matter their background or social standing.
It's so interesting because it's like the complete opposite of how a snob acts, right?
Right.
They're all about elevating themselves at the expense of others,
Mhm.
creating that distance.
Yeah, that brings us back to this idea of intelligence being multidimensional,
Yeah.
It challenges that very limited view of intelligence as purely cognitive,
So, what are some of these other facets of intelligence that the excerpt highlights?
So one is emotional intelligence, which is basically the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, but also empathize with others.
Makes sense.
And, people with high emotional intelligence, they're usually pretty good at reading social cues, navigating relationships, and responding to situations with empathy and compassion.
It's like when I think of someone who's really emotionally intelligent, I think of a therapist,
Yeah.
They might not have all the fancy academic credentials of a neuroscientist or something,
Right.
but their ability to connect with people on that emotional level, to really understand their motivations and help them navigate these tough situations, that requires a different kind of intelligence.
Totally. And honestly, it's probably more valuable in everyday life,
Absolutely.
So what else? Another one is adaptability, being able to, adjust to changing circumstances.
Roll with the punches.
Yeah. Learn from mistakes, think on your feet. That's real intelligence.
It's like, it's not about how hard you fall, but how fast you get back up.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
You could have all the book smarts in the world, but
If you can't adapt.
you're not going to get very far.
And then that leads us to creativity, right? Thinking outside the box, coming up with new ideas, seeing things from a different perspective.
And let's be real, some of the most creative people throughout history weren't necessarily like geniuses on paper.
Right.
It was their willingness to challenge the norms, to experiment, to take risks that allowed them to see things differently.
Like artists, musicians, entrepreneurs.
Right. They often don't fit that traditional mold of intelligence, but they contribute so much.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that intelligence comes in many forms. And this excerpt, it argues that these broader facets, the emotional intelligence, adaptability, creativity, that ability to connect, they're actually more important than just having knowledge or a high IQ.
It's like the difference between just knowing a bunch of facts and actually being able to apply that knowledge in the real world to problem solve, build relationships, make a difference.
It all comes back to snobbery, right? Because often that behavior comes from such a limited view of what intelligence is.
It's true. They're so focused on those external things like status and knowledge.
And missing out on the bigger picture.
Yeah. It's almost like they're trapped in this cycle of constantly trying to prove their worth through those superficial measures.
It's almost like it hinders their own growth in a way.
Yeah, it's sad because I think a lot of snobs are actually really insecure deep down,
Oh, definitely.
trying to mask it with that superiority.
But it backfires.
Yeah, they alienate people, miss out on real connections.
They limit their own opportunities.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And it perpetuates this cycle, right? Their behavior makes others feel inadequate,
It reinforces those hierarchies.
creates a culture of judgment and exclusion.
Okay, so I think we've done a good job of kind of unpacking the different facets of intelligence and how they relate to this idea of snobbery.
Yeah.
So in this final part, I think we should shift gears a little bit and talk about what we can do about it. Like, how do we challenge this behavior and foster a more inclusive, an appreciative culture?
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
All right. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. And we've really covered a lot of ground today,
We have, from that initial definition to the impact, even the motivations, right? And what true intelligence looks like.
Right. But, knowledge without action doesn't get us very far. So what do we actually do with this? How do we, navigate a world where snobbery is still very much a thing. But the excerpt gives us some ideas, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness, right?
Okay.
Recognizing our own biases and judgments, because we all have them.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like step one to dismantling these patterns,
Yeah. Right, holding up that mirror and being honest with ourselves about, am I placing too much emphasis on these superficial things? Or am I judging people based on their background?
Yeah. And then when we encounter it in others, finding ways to respond constructively.
But that can be hard. How do you call someone out on their snobbery without it turning into an argument or making things worse?
It really depends on the situation, Sometimes a little humor can work. Like if someone's making a snide comment about, I don't know, what someone's wearing, you could say something like, fashion is so subjective. What matters is they feel good.
That's good. It kind of shifts the focus.
Yeah, but if it's more serious, like if someone's being excluded or put down because of their background,
Then what?
then you got to be more direct, Silence can be seen as agreement, and those patterns just continue, right? So you could say, hey, I don't think it's fair to judge someone based on where they come from, or everyone deserves to be treated with respect,
But that takes guts, right? Especially if it's someone who has power or, if those attitudes are just accepted within a certain group.
It does, but even planting that seed of doubt can make a difference, right? It might not change things overnight, but it opens up that space for others to feel like they can speak up to.
It's like that domino effect.
Yeah, and sometimes the most powerful response is just not engaging at all,
Right.
Don't stoop to their level. Focus your energy on people who value authenticity and kindness.
Yeah. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, who appreciate you for who you are, not for what you have or where you came from.
People who embody those qualities of true intelligence that we talked about, like the empathy, the adaptability, the humility.
And, you always have the power to choose how you respond to snobbery.
Right.
You can let it eat away at you, make you doubt yourself, or you can see it for what it is, a reflection of their own insecurities.
Exactly. It's not about you, it's about them.
Takes the sting out of it a little bit,
Totally. It's like their judgment is coming from a place of insecurity, not actual superiority.
That's a powerful thought. I think that's something everyone listening should take away from this.
Absolutely. Don't let them dim your light, Cultivate those qualities that truly matter, the empathy, the open-mindedness.
Be the change you want to see.
Exactly, because that's what's going to create a better world.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the psychology of snobbery,
My pleasure.
I hope everyone listening has gained some insights and maybe even feels a little bit empowered to challenge those attitudes.
The world needs more kindness, more understanding.
More connection, absolutely.
It starts with us.
Until next time, stay curious.
This is DigitView.